What's good? It's Woog. We are going to talk some boxing here, and I don't have one topic that I want to talk about. There are going to be a few, but the one that I want to emphasize and lean into the most is going to be Showtime's departure from the sport of boxing, what it means for boxing, what it means for PBC, and who I would like to see PBC try to partner with going forward. There are a lot of elements to discuss here. So we're going to talk that Showtime, and it is a pretty dark week for boxing. I don't think most fight fans feel good about this. And anybody who is celebrating the departure of Showtime boxing, in my view, isn't really a boxing fan. They're either a drama fan, they might be a fan of, I think the term is schadenfreude, when you take pleasure in others' misfortune. But for all of us boxing fans, I think that we are all having a pretty, a somber week. I mean, not just because of what's taking place literally in the world. There's a ton of bad going on just worldwide right now. I mean, it's a really bad week from a macro perspective, which makes anything boxing related pretty minuscule. But for the sake of our boxing fanship, let's get into what is a pretty sad time for boxing. And so we're going to talk a bit about that. We're also going to cover a few topics. And normally I would do this in a live chat, and we're going to pick the live chats back up next Tuesday. But I just wanted to take a little bit of time and talk some boxing on a few topics. So we're going to talk Showtime boxing. We're going to talk Leigh Wood and him vacating his title. We're going to talk about how important of a fight David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade is. And one of the reasons that's such a important fight is because it seems like Canelo is going to wait for that to play out to make his next move. And there are several key fighters that are essentially waiting for Canelo to make his next move. So a lot of boxing is kind of on standby until Benavidez versus Andrade is squared away. We are going to talk a little bit about Alexis Rocha and Rocha-Santillan. That is the Golden Boy fight that's taking place this weekend. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Jack Catterall against Jorge Linares. Look, spoiler, I expect Jack Catterall to win. If you look at Jorge Linares' history of trying to do 140, it hasn't worked out for him. And even when he was younger, he stepped up to 140. He got smoked by Pablo Cesar Cano. So I don't expect him to have a good deal of success against Jack Catterall. Not to mention, Jorge Linares was more recently stopped against Zayor Abdullayev. That was a Devin Haney opponent back in the day that Haney stopped within 4 rounds. So, I mean, the writing is on the wall with Jorge Linares' career. So I expect Jack Catterall to win that one. But let's go back to Showtime boxing. And obviously HBO left the game about 5 years ago, and now Showtime is out. So what that means is that PBC is going to have to find a new home. And Showtime, to me, it kind of represents the last of the elite broadcasting in boxing. Now these other players, they're catching up, and they deliver some good broadcasting. And I mean, obviously they have good fights, like Devin Haney versus Vasily Lomachenko took place on ESPN. But I'm saying in terms of just the fleshed out production, like when HBO used to air their fights, as soon as that little HBO logo would flash, you already knew what time it was. It had a theme song. It had their introductions. It had just the state-of-the-art broadcast team. And that, regardless of whether you paired Jim Lampley with, George Foreman back in the day, Emmanuel Stewart, the late Emmanuel Stewart back in the day, or more recently, Max Kellerman or Larry Merchant. So you would have the non-boxer analysts, and then you would have somebody who's either a boxer or a trainer, Lennox Lewis for some time, George Foreman for some time, Bernard Hopkins was in that seat for a minute. Andre Ward even did his thing a little bit on there. But in the most recent years, it was usually Roy Jones Jr. occupying that space. Before that, it was Emmanuel Stewart, who was not a boxer, but a trainer, pretty much occupying that expert commentator. Whereas, again, you would then have the Larry Merchant or Max Kellerman in the other seat on the other side of Lampley. So there was a level of polish to that broadcast that is that's unmatched in my view. But the close second was Showtime Boxing. And now that Showtime Boxing, who put on 4 of the 5 biggest fights in boxing history. So if you look at like some of the biggest fights ever, whether you're talking Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, whether you're talking Floyd Mayweather versus Canelo Alvarez, Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor, it was Showtime that was broadcasting those fights. So yeah, this is a void that I don't know how it's going to be filled. And speaking to the larger changing of the environment, the content viewing ecosystem, I mean, just the whole landscape is changing now to where, I mean, shoot, if you want to be real about it, I mean, PBC might want to look to something like TikTok or a YouTube, YouTube's premium service or something like that. Like, you want to hitch your wagon on a winning platform, because the problem is today, if you look at who's broadcasting boxing, at least here in the States, you've got ESPN, which does have a huge audience, right? Everybody pretty much has ESPN, right? Now, I don't know how many of those people have ESPN Plus, which a lot of the fights fall to. But if you have the ESPN platform, that is probably the platform right now in boxing in the US that has the most eyeballs. The problem is, I'm under the suspicion that ESPN Disney, the parent company, doesn't give a damn about boxing. Like, if there's a fight on and you try to find it in the queue, you usually have to click horizontally a good amount to run into the content that you're looking for. Like, it takes a backseat to UFC content, takes a backseat to golf, college football, all kinds of other sports take precedence over boxing on the ESPN platform. I don't know if Top Rank isn't doing enough to push and nudge ESPN to, spotlight their content a bit more, but sometimes I'm looking for a fight and I'm like, damn, if I wasn't like a boxing fanatic who was looking feverishly for the content, I wouldn't even know it was on here. That's how I feel about ESPN's relationship with boxing. Now with DAZN prioritizes boxing more than ESPN does, but it's a subscription where if you are not like a huge boxing fan, or I don't know, a darts fan, they got a lot of darts on DAZN, you're probably not going to be a subscriber of DAZN. So if you're willing to pay, 10 or now $20 for some boxing specifically and pay for a platform because of boxing, then you're probably not going to be watching a ton of DAZN's boxing content, which is a huge problem. And this problem with boxing being a viable business and being able to be mainstream again, it pretty much started, ironically, when boxing went to HBO and Showtime. I mean, as great as those broadcasting teams were, it did to some degree kind of shrink the boxing audience. This further shrinks the boxing audience. I'll say it like this: to the degree that boxing becomes a premium product, that's to the degree that you are shrinking the boxing audience, at least here in the States. So DAZN, it's a premium subscription service. So if you don't have dough to shell out specifically for boxing, you're not going to get all of those great fighters that are fighting on DAZN, unfortunately. Now, you do still have ESPN, but now you don't have Showtime, which was another premium service. Like, I had Showtime, then I didn't have Showtime, but then I got Showtime again, pretty much specifically for the boxing. I wasn't viewing a ton of non-boxing Showtime content. So all that leads me to, where does PBC go from here? Now, by the way, NBC Peacock just picked up Boxer. That's Ben Shalom's outlet. So Ben Shalom, they have like a Savannah Marshall. That's like one of their premier. They don't have the deepest roster, but they've got some good fighters. They've got Joshua Buatsi, who just pulled out of his fight with Dan Aziz. I don't think that card is still going to be shown on NBC Peacock, but that fight card, I know is going to continue just with its undercard. I know it's going to be showing on Sky Sports. Not yet sure if Peacock is still going to show what was going to be Joshua Buatsi versus Dan Aziz. But yeah, Boxer's got him. I think Boxer has Lawrence Okolie. Boxer, I think they have Martin Bakole. That's the guy who beat Tony Yoka before Carlos Takam beat Tony Yoka. They've got Chris Billiam Smith. That's the guy who just beat Lawrence Okolie. I don't know if they have Natasha Jonas, but they have some good fighters. They have Richard Riakporhe. They have Daniel Dubois' sister, Caroline Dubois. So they've got some good fighters, but it's not a deep roster. I was actually surprised that they got a deal with Peacock, but that's good for boxing. Peacock, NBC, I don't know how well they're doing subscriptions wise, but the more platforms that have boxing, the better. But for the PBC, I'm thinking I don't want to see them place boxing, I don't know, on a Paramount Plus, which, I mean, that wouldn't happen. It was Paramount that just dropped Showtime, so that's not in the cards. But who would I want to see them, partner with? Maybe Hulu? Maybe, one of the names that was floated out as a possibility was Amazon Prime. That one interests me because it's a huge platform. No, they don't have the same type of viewership based on their original content in the way that Netflix does. I mean, best case scenario, boxing or PBC in this case strikes a deal with Netflix and their content is fronted to the front of the Netflix queue. That would be great. Ain't gonna happen. But Amazon Prime is starting to build more original content. And if you could, get Amazon Prime to somewhat give a damn about boxing, where they don't just bury it in the back of their queue, that would be great for boxing. Look, ironically, PBC's initial mission was to get boxing to the people who weren't subscribing to the premium channels, to the non-HBO viewers. So when HBO fell out, or maybe just before that, PBC was partnering with first CBS. So that would have been great, right? That takes you back to the wide world of sports days when everybody, whether they had cable TV or not, was able to see a Sugar Ray Leonard fight. Or I think I remember watching Oscar De La Hoya versus John Molina early in Oscar's career. So yeah, if you could get a situation like that, the problem is in today's content viewing ecosystem, or just based on consumer habits, we don't have channels like we used to have channels. You used to be able to see 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, right? And you were able to just watch TV like that. Things are way more scattered out in terms of the different places where people are getting their content. So you don't have a silver bullet like PBC thought they had with CBS and then with Fox, and then obviously one by one, those, platforms stop showing boxing. Fox was out after CBS was out. Now Showtime is out. Maybe there's a chance with Amazon Prime, but stay tuned. If they are able to work that out in a way where people who are clicking into Prime are exposed to the boxing content's thumbnail, that would be great. Another thing is, I didn't like how Showtime was stingy on the archived fights not being on the platform. That sucked to me. You could pay for a pay-per-view and not be able to watch that fight 2 months down the road. Or a Showtime fight would happen, then it would disappear from the platform, never to re-emerge. A lot of that was going on. So I didn't like that. Another thing that's kind of crazy about this is that Showtime was having a pretty historic year. Boxing, by and large, is having a historic year in terms of us getting a lot of great fights. You could go down the list. Gervonta Tank Davis, obviously, versus Ryan Garcia. That was the super fight in terms of what got the most buys. And then you had the most important fight, the best fight that could be made in boxing, finally, with Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford. And we got other fights. And I'm not even talking about how the fights played out. All that really matters is the matchups, the fights being made. You can't control what the outcome of the fight is. The whole point is we just want to see the fight happen. So Teofimo Lopez versus Josh Taylor. Teofimo Lopez won by a pretty significant margin, but we didn't know that going into the fight. So we got that fight. We got, as I mentioned, Devin Haney versus Vasily Lomachenko. We've gotten 2 Canelo fights against John Ryder and against Jermell Charlo. We've gotten all kinds of very, very good fights. fights. We got David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant, and now we're getting David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade. This has been a terrific year. And even with, like, if we're just looking at Showtime with the Tank versus Ryan, Spence versus Crawford, that wasn't it. I mean, we got like a very good Oshaki Foster versus Ray Vargas fight. There were a lot of fights that took place in between the big mega fights, right? So boxing looked like, in terms of the fights that we were getting, like it was in a very healthy place. But when it comes down to the brass tacks, it's very clear that business-wise, boxing is not in a healthy place. And it's funny because I always remember, you know, Eddie Hearn was always talking about, and promoters will say different things to kind of rib their competition and stuff, but he was always saying, and he was saying this as far back as when Showtime Sean Porter versus Terrence Crawford was being made on ESPN. He was saying, I don't know where they are getting this money from, because there were different people who were thinking about bidding on certain fights. Like, remember when Teofimo Lopez versus George Kambosos was kind of up for grabs, right? And Eddie Hearn is like, I would love to show these fights on Matchroom DAZN, but I'm not going to pay what other people seem to be willing to pay for these fights. Like, the fight doesn't merit that much money, just market wise. You're overpaying the fighters. And he's like, yes, I would like to see fighters getting paid as much as they could get paid, but you've got to be reasonable and realistic in terms of how much these fighters are going to generate. That's going to make this either be a profitable endeavor, or you're just going to be hemorrhaging money. And I'm not saying that that is what happened with PBC, but they have developed the reputation of taking care of their fighters. I just wonder, like, what the balance is in terms of taking care of the fighters and still being able to drive a sustainable, thriving boxing business. I don't know how to thread that needle. And to be honest, I don't know how imperiled Golden Boy is with their relationship with DAZN, or how imperiled Matchroom might be with their relationship with DAZN, or who the hell knows what's going on with Disney. If you take a look at what's going on with Bob Iger and Disney as a business, what they're doing content wise, like the properties that they're purchasing, you know, like those Fox intellectual properties, or them, you know, purchasing Marvel and overpaying for certain things and trying to cut costs in other ways. I don't know if Disney's even going to hold on to like ESPN, let alone ESPN continuing to show top ranked fights. I don't know, but I'm not getting a great feeling about boxing's position in the content ecosystem business wise right now. So yeah, stay tuned. But it's ironic, yeah, because Showtime's having a hell of a year, but they are also shutting their doors on boxing at the end of that same year. So, you know, stay tuned to that. But it is a pretty sobering week for fight fans. I mean, I've got tons of memories watching Showtime boxing, just like I had tons of memories watching HBO boxing. But yeah, Showtime, in terms of the fights it delivered, had a phenomenal year, and it's even going to have a good start. Like I just saw that they are adding Subriel Matias versus Ergashev on that David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade undercard. That's already a phenomenal card. Subriel Matias, I think, might have his hands full right there. He's one of the belt holders at 140, and he's had a hell of a like fight by fight schedule. If you look at how tough some of those fights and fighters were, and he's getting all like the tough draws, the guys who don't have a big name but are very, very tough and durable and just vicious fighters. Like, that's kind of the worst of both worlds. It's, you know, high risk, relatively low reward for Subriel Matias. And this Ergashev fight, I feel, falls into that same category. But the headline fight on that card, I'm going to talk a little bit about this one. And look, I'm about to issue an early thoughts video on David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade. I'll tell you right now, my gut tells me that 35-year-old legs against somebody who pressures you in the way that David Benavidez applies the pressure, I don't think it's going to work well. Even if you look at some of Andrade's recent fights against Liam Williams, or even more recently against Damon Nicholson, he's not exactly looking like a spring chicken in the second half of these fights. He has only one fight at 168, so he's technically still going up, right? I still, in my head, view Demetrius Andrade as a 160 guy. And so I'm kind of thinking, how many of the early rounds, if Demetrius Andrade has early round success, how many of those rounds can he bank to where if he survives the last half of the fight, that he has a chance on the scorecard? Because I inevitably think that he's going to be spending more time on the ropes. He's going to be easier to hit in the second half. He's going to be moving around less. He's going to be less sharp. That's what happens when you fatigue. Like, I mean, I'll go on like 4 to 8 mile runs pretty frequently. And, you know, depending on how you're feeling in that first mile, when you get into the run, you're thinking, okay, yeah, I'm really gonna go for it this time. I'm gonna like put my foot on the gas. I'm gonna try to pick up, you know, the speed, try to sustain that speed throughout the thing. And you've got all these like thoughts about what you're about to do. You get into mile 2, and then you're like, damn, my legs are feeling a little bit heavier. Okay. And then, you know, as you start fatiguing slowly, you just realize, and I think about these things because you got a lot of time to think when you're on runs. I'm thinking, man, if I was a fighter at this stage of fatigue, I couldn't reliably make those little quick movements and those quick decisions and reactions, basically your reflexes, your legs, your foot placement, foot movement, head movement, torso movement. When you start getting tired, your body starts slowly becoming more clumsy. You stop being able to control those little detailed movements that made you so formidable earlier in the workout. So I'm just assuming that Demetrius Andrade is going to hit that, you know, that period where the things that were working for him in the early rounds, like they were working for Caleb Plant, are going to fail him in the second half of the fight. But that's just my gut instinct right now. Keep your eye open for that early thoughts video, because I definitely get more into the weeds. But this is such an important fight. And the reason it's important, not only because this is finally going to be, you know, Demetrius Andrade's moment to have a signature fight against a signature opponent, first time in his career. It's crazy. And, you know, it's unfortunately, it's not like, you know, Jermall Charlo or Jaime Munguia or somebody who I think he would have had a better chance against when he was at middleweight. This is one of those, in my view, be careful what you ask for. Like, this might have worked out when you were 33, 32, 31, something like that. I just feel like it might be a little too late to be fighting a guy who's as young and as hungry and as vicious and is just good as David Benavidez right now. But we'll see. But it's an important fight because I feel like Canelo is waiting for this fight to play out, because there is a lot of pressure. And I think the WBC even said that Canelo's going to have to satisfy his WBC mandatory, which David Benavidez currently occupies that, by April. And I'm assuming that if they schedule it for May, that WBC Mauricio Suleiman's going to give his blessing there. But I'm saying that to say, if Canelo wants to keep his belt, he's going to have to fight a WBC mandatory for his Cinco de Mayo weekend fight, right? So David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade represents Canelo's, basically the triggering action. So depending on how this plays out, Canelo might fight David Benavidez. He might fight Demetrius Andrade. I'm assuming that if Demetrius Andrade wins a boring decision, Canelo might go another route. Like, he hasn't sounded like he's too interested in fighting either guy. If you listen to his rhetoric, he hasn't sounded like he really wants to fight David Benavidez or Demetrius Andrade. But I feel like he understands, he's reading the room. And I think that he knows that everybody wants to see him fight David Benavidez. So I think that he's waiting to see how this plays out to determine, am I going to fight either one of these guys? And that has like a ripple effect now, because Terrence Crawford wants to fight Canelo. So if Canelo decides not to fight David Benavidez or Demetrius Andrade, then it might be Terrence Crawford, right? It sounds crazy, but it might happen. And Terrence Crawford, at least in what he's saying, sounds like he's open to going from 147, passing 154, passing 160, all the way to 168 to fight Canelo. But I'm assuming that a part of that is because of the idea of Canelo being the undisputed champion. If Canelo doesn't satisfy his mandatory, he might get stripped of one of those belts if he doesn't fight the winner of Benavidez versus Andrade. So would Terrence Crawford still want to go up and fight Canelo at 168 if, you know, only 3 of the belts were up for grabs? I don't know. But it appears that Terrence Crawford is taking some time to just navigate, peep the scene, see what's going on, and see what Canelo's next move is which again, I believe is anchored on the result of David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade. So you've got Benavidez and Andrade tied up in the fight. You've got Canelo waiting for that. You've got Crawford kind of waiting for Canelo. You've got Jermell Charlo maybe waiting for Crawford, because Jermell Charlo, is he going to fight Tim Tszyu? Is he going to fight his mandatory, who's Bakram Murtazaliev? That's his IBF mandatory. So we know that Charlo just lost his, or was stripped of his WBO belt. Tim Tszyu has that. And so Murtazaliev is going to see if he's going to be fighting for a vacant IBF belt, or if Jermell Charlo is going to defend his IBF belt. So you've got Jermell Charlo, who's tied up indirectly by David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade. You've got Murtazaliev, who's also tied up in that. And you have Tim Tszyu, in a way, who is tied up with that fight, because Tim Tszyu is kind of seeing what's going to happen with that IBF belt and what's going to happen with Jermell Charlo. Now, Tim Tszyu's obviously been staying very busy in the meantime with wins over Tony Harrison, Carlos Ocampo, and now beating Brian Mendoza. So yeah, Tim Tszyu is kind of indirectly affected by David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade. And then there's Dimitri Bivol, who hasn't fought in 2023 at all. And I'm assuming that he might be looking to see what Canelo is looking to do next. So yeah, there's just a lot that's kind of anchored or hitched on David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade. So yeah, that's that. And then I want to get a little bit into the Golden Boy card between Alexis Rocha and Giovanni Santillan. This is actually going to be a better than advertised opponent. This isn't like a gimme win for Alexis Rocha. So I just want to say that I'm happy that a competitive Alexis Rocha fight is about to take place. Now, it's not for lack of trying. I just think that Alexis Rocha is in the unfortunate spot of being with a promoter who doesn't have a deep stable at 147. Now, he's got Virgil Ortiz, but I mean, his career, as far as I see it, is kind of on the ropes right now. So, you know, they were talking about maybe Terrence Crawford versus Alexa Rocha. That was before Crawford versus Spence happened. But Golden Boy is going to have to partner with another promoter to give Alexis Rocha a signature 147-pound opponent. So yeah, this is actually a kind of a quality, lesser known fighter that Alexis Rocha is going to be fighting. And I'm actually thinking about going to this one. It's going to be at the Kia Forum in Inglewood, California. So it might be a game time decision for me. I might decide on whether to cop tickets on the morning of. I mean, there's also like the UFC card that's taking place early that's going to be featuring a headline fight of what was supposed to be Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira, but Oliveira had to pull out and then enter Alexander Volkanovski. So it's going to be a rematch between Volkanovski, who's a champion at 145, who's going to once again go up to challenge Makhachev. And this is going to be a daytime fight because it's taking place in the Middle East. So that's the main event. Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski. And then in the co-main, it's going to be Khamzat Chimaev versus the former 170-pound champion Kamaru Usman, who is on short notice. I'm talking like 11 days notice or something very short. Is it even that? It might be even shorter notice than that, but Kamaru Usman has just lost back-to-back fights against Leon Edwards. Now he's going to be making his 185-pound debut on short notice against a young monster in Khamzat Chimaev. This fight was supposed to be Khamzat Chimaev versus Paulo Costa, who is a true 185 guy. So you've basically got a main event and a co-main where there's a replacement fighter in each of those fights, but the replacement fighter arguably makes the matchup more interesting. I know a lot of people did want to see Islam versus Charles Oliveira too, but all that to say, I'm going to be watching that fight in the afternoon here. And so around that time, I'm probably going to decide on whether I'm going to go to Alexis Rocha versus Giovanni Santillan with Scrappy Ramirez on the undercard. I saw that Jojo Diaz, who was going to fight Richard Medina, just had to pull out of the fight due to experiencing COVID symptoms. So he got sick. Jojo's no longer on that Golden Boy card, unfortunately. But yeah, you still got Alexis Rocha versus Santillan. And then you've got, I think Caroline Dubois is on that undercard as well. But yeah, you've got the what is it, junior flyweight or is it light flyweight, 115, I believe, Scrappy Ramirez, who, he's from Los Angeles. I think he's from South Central Los Angeles. But yeah, he's been, kind of a flashy-ish fighter. I don't know how far he's going to go, but he's kind of like a pretty exciting fighter to watch. He's got a pretty flamboyant style. He's got kind of a loud personality. He's one of those, kind of badasses that you don't want to see in the alley if he was really about, that life. If he was a G and not a boxer, he's not the guy you want to cross paths with. So yeah, keep your eye on Scrappy Ramirez. And if you are already up on him, let me know what you think about him and his style. And before I go, I want to talk a little bit about Leigh Wood in the wake of him delivering another dramatic, spectacular knockout, this one over Josh Warrington in a fight that, man, it was going bad for Leigh Wood too. I mean, it was almost going as bad for Leigh Wood as it was going for Leigh Wood against Michael Conlan before he knocked him out in the 12th round. Oh man, Leigh Wood never ceases to amaze me. He is one of those must-see fighters. And I was saying this in a 1 minute short. It feels like every Leigh Wood fight, it's almost like a movie script, you know what I mean? But yeah, he just vacated his WBA title, which he first won against Zhu Can in 2021, defended it successfully against Michael Conlan in that 2022 fight of the year. Then he fights Mauricio Lara the first time, gets knocked out in the 7th round, rematches Mauricio Lara, puts on a boxing clinic, beats Lara via wide decision. And he was pretty gangster for even taking that fight, because remember, Lara missed weight by a few pounds. And, Ben Davison is like, I don't know if he should be taking this fight. But Leigh Wood ended up taking the fight and ended up kind of spanking Mauricio Lara. And so then he fights Josh Warrington, knocks him out after kind of getting outboxed, just beaten up. Like, he looked sluggish in there, and it might have been due to the weight cut. It really might have. And so he's going to be dropping that belt to move up to 130. And I just want to leave on this note. I don't love Leigh Wood's chances as I see it right now in terms of becoming a 130-pound champion. If you look at the champs right now, no, they aren't like A-listers, right? You've got some kind of lesser names who happen to be occupying belts. I mean, I would say Emmanuel Navarrete is the most known guy with the belt in that division right now, followed by maybe Joe Cordina. So Navarrete is the WBO champ, just defended it successfully against Oscar Valdez in a fight that I thought Oscar Valdez was probably going to beat Emmanuel Navarrete. But you've got Navarrete holding the WBO belt, Hector Garcia holding, I believe, the WBA belt. You've got O'Shaquie Foster, who beat Ray Vargas and captured the WBC belt in a vacant title fight. That was one of the two belts that Shakur Stevenson relinquished or lost on the scales before his fight against Conceição. He had the WBC belt, which O'Shaquie Foster now holds, and he had the WBO belt, which Emmanuel Navarrete won in a vacant title fight against Liam Wilson in a fight that Navarrete got flattened. He got knocked down badly. I thought he was about to get stopped by Liam Wilson. But the other champion is Joe Cordina, who's got the IBF belt. So Navarrete, I wouldn't like Leigh Wood's chances against him. Hector Garcia, I don't think I would like. Hector Garcia fought well against Gervonta Davis for a few rounds. Like, Hector Garcia is pretty good. He's the guy who beat Chris Colbert and then beat Roger Gutierrez. I don't think that Leigh Wood, who had good power at 126, I don't think he's going to have devastating power at 130. And, while he has gotten a lot better and has improved throughout his career at his, just his boxing ability, his, sweet science ability, right? His technique and all that. He's gotten better, but he looked really bad against Josh Warrington in his last fight. And, the lefty, Michael Conlan, was able to drop Leigh Wood, and we saw what Michael Conlan was not able to do against Luis Alberto Lopez. But, Conlan dropped Leigh Wood early, and watching that fight, it didn't look obvious to me that Leigh Wood was the better sweet science boxer between the two. He just had more durability, and he was able to knock Michael Conlan out. Not to mention just like boatloads of heart, but Michael Conlan showed a lot of heart. I think Michael Conlan just has a chin and physical durability issue. It's not a heart issue with Michael Conlan, in my opinion. But yeah, Leigh Wood doesn't have a great chin. And so I'm just thinking, if Michael Conlan was able to kind of dip low and throw those left hands over the top, what does that mean in a fight against somebody with the power of Joe Cordina? Like, I saw Joe Cordina knock out, Kenichi Ogawa, to capture the title. I saw Joe Cordina knock down and just beat up Shavkat Rakhimov. Like, Shavkat Rakhimov is a pretty damn good fighter, and Joe Cordina, yes, I think it ended up being a split decision, which I didn't think was warranted. I thought Joe Cordina like pretty handedly won that one. But yeah, Joe Cordina, he's a good technical boxer. I think he's might be a better technical boxer, probably a better technical boxer in my opinion than Leigh Wood, and I think he hits harder, and I think he's got a better chin. So I don't think Leigh Wood wins that fight. But you know, like I said in the 1 minute short, I've been wrong about Leigh Wood before. O'Shaquie Foster, too early to tell. He's looking really good, and he looked really good against Ray Vargas, who was trying to step up from 126 to 130. O'Shaquie Foster looked very solid. Like, he just outboxed Ray Vargas. He, you know, looked like he was very elusive and had a good chin. He's got good quick reflexes. He's got a solid jab, and he's got good movement. Like, I could see him outboxing Leigh Wood, but I would imagine Leigh Wood would try to make it a fight. But would he be able to make it a fight against O'Shaquie Foster, who I think is just the naturally bigger guy between the two? So I wouldn't love Leigh Wood's chances there. And yeah, then against Emmanuel Navarrete, I don't know if I like any of the other three champions' chances against Emmanuel Navarrete in that division. But yeah, I want to see a couple of those unification fights happen. I know we don't get that in a lot of divisions, but you know, O'Shaquie Foster just signed with DAZN, so it's possible that he could fight Joe Cordina. I think Emmanuel Navarrete might be the odd man out right now, being that he's on Top Rank. And then Hector Garcia was with PBC. I don't know what's going to happen, if he's still going to be with PBC wherever they eventually land, but I would just love to see some champions fighting champions at 130. But it's going to be interesting to see where Leigh Wood fits in that landscape. And again, he's 35, I believe, 35 years old. So no, I don't like the smaller, older guy who's just been in a bunch of tough fights, very, very tough fights. Like the brutality in him versus Michael Conlan, that was an all-timer. It just in terms of how dramatic and how back and forth that one was. Outstanding fight. But you go from that to getting, you know, knocked out against Mauricio Lara, to getting beaten up before knocking out Josh Warrington, getting beaten up there. I just don't know how much Leigh Wood has left to give, but I mean, he's been giving it in these last couple of years of his career. You want to talk about a great late career resurgence where he went from kind of like a fringe contender or a regional champ to being a multiple time featherweight champion, WBA featherweight champion, with multiple title defenses. I wouldn't have guessed that for Leigh Wood. I mean, he had just lost to Jazza Dickens a few years ago. But yeah, let me know what you think about Leigh Wood's chances at 130. Let me know what you think about this Golden Boy card coming up this weekend. Let me know what you think about David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade, and Subriel Matias versus Ergashev. And let me know what you think about Showtime's exit from the boxing business. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. By the way, again, we're picking up the live chats next week. I can't wait. I'm Wood. Thanks for tuning in.